Yes, sir. Good afternoon. Prantik, sir.
Yeah,
Good
yeah, good afternoon. Good afternoon,
Yeah.
Kapil sir.
Yeah. We'll start in 5 minutes.
For sure.
Yeah. Shall we start, sir?
Yeah, I'm ready if the participants are.
You are, yeah, you always answer. 15 have joined out of 28 so far.
Okay, this is they have a lunch break, isn't it?
Yeah, but that was at 12 o'clock, from 12 to 1 o'clock. I think that's sufficient time.
Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
Well, they are 26. We can start, only 2 are left. One hasn't, one is absent today. Mangala Tomam from Vardha. So friends, I welcome you all to this afternoon session of the refresher course in English being organized by the UGC Human Resource Development Center of Rashtra Sant Tukaroji Maharaj, Nagpur University, Nagpur. And I am again glad to welcome Professor Prantik Banerjee from Hislop College, Nagpur. As all of you are, we all are waiting for his lecture, and we are really, what I should say, we are not, we are really unfortunate that as per the norms of the UGC, sir is sir is permitted to engage only 4 sessions. So otherwise sir would say क्या बच्चे की जान लेंगे क्या, नहीं sir?
I know.
So on behalf of the university and the participants, I welcome you to this session, sir. And sir will be making a presentation on literature, war and technology. Am I right, sir?
No.
Literature.
No, I'm going to introduce a new topic.
Okay.
But let me not give away the topic.
Okay, that is war, literature, and technology that I have.
Right. No, but I've kind of changed the topic a bit.
Okay, we'll do.
A bit.
Okay.
I've changed.
Carry
I'm
on,
going
sir.
to speak on something new. Right.
Okay, sir. Okay. So yeah, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Kapil. Thanks. More than बच्चे की जान लोगे, it's more like So good afternoon, participants. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah. So I hope you haven't had a sumptuous lunch. I hope you people are still. I hope you people are still a little hungry, because let's make that transition from thought for food to food for thought. And let's start. Since Kapil sir started with one of the most popular dialogues from film "Bachche Ki Jaan Loge Kya." So let's start with I asking you a question. What do Shah Rukh Khan, Amir Khan, Karan Johar, and Tushar Kapoor have in common? What do Shah Rukh Khan, Amir Khan, Karan Johar, and Tushar Kapoor have in common? You can unmute and answer.
The K syndrome, if I'm not wrong.
The
K factor.
Okay, all right. A good shot at the question, but I'm afraid, Pooja, you got it wrong. Anybody
Without
else?
food, that's the thought which came to my mind, at least.
Are without food? Oh gosh. Okay.
I know. Anyway.
Else wanting to? Anybody else with a guess? What? I'll repeat. What do Shah Rukh Khan, Amir Khan, Tushar Kapoor, Karan Johar have in common? All right. All right. Well, babies, I would say. Well, not exactly babies. What I mean is, well, they all became fathers by hiring boobs. Yeah, you heard me right. They all became fathers They all became fathers by hiring wombs. They all found, they all have found a, shall I say, they all have found a woman willing to rent her womb to carry a fertilized egg and deliver a baby over the course of time. And so, of course, it goes without saying that the bearer of their babies or the carrier of their babies, in their cases, those who made it possible for them to be parents, in even single parent, because as is the case with Karan Johar, well, they did so. These bearer of babies, or women who became the bearer of their babies, they did so not because of, shall we say, not on account of any noble act or any altruistic gesture, but rather in exchange for considerable sums of money, which perhaps nobody really knows except the stakeholders involved, the actors involved in this babies for money kind of transaction. So welcome, friends, to the world of commercial surrogacy. Yeah, welcome to the world of commercial surrogacy, where the dream of many, the dream of parenthood for many couples, or even a person wanting to be a single parent, is fulfilled by artificial reproductive technologies. I mean, surrogacy, of course, the word surrogacy means many things to many people. I mean, for infertile couples, the word surrogacy would probably mean a chance to have a child. For working women in their working women not wanting a break from their high-profile careers, perhaps it's a shot. Surrogacy would mean a shot at parenthood without any break in their careers. For surrogate mothers, those who are at the center of my talk today, perhaps it would mean money, sometimes big money, and of course for doctors and even lawyers who are often involved in this transaction, which always carries a medico-legal angle. It's big business. So all of this, of course, is facilitated by advanced technologies of reproduction, advanced technologies of genetics as well. So continuing in the same vein as with which I began, I mean, this is my third session with you all. So I began with books. I came to bodies in the second talk. In the first talk, I began with books, talking about how technology is changing what a book is, and looking at the futurity of the bookishness of books. In my second talk, I moved on to bodies, and we talked about, if you do remember, I mean, we kind of, for a minute, even I have forgotten what I spoke on in the second section, in my second talk. Does anyone remember?
Illness narrative, sir.
Illness was there, yeah.
All right. It actually was a quick test, but never mind. You passed the test. So yes. So in my second talk, I focused on bodies, illness, medicine, and bodies, and we talked about illness narratives and medical memoirs. In today's talk, from books to bodies, I'm going to shift to babies. So rather than, as Pooja Swami said, the K factor, what is common to my three talks is the B factor. And so books to bodies, and from bodies to babies. Friends, Google babies. Google babies, yeah. Google babies, post-colonial wombs and body politics. And their representations in contemporary English fiction is the subject of my talk today. And what I'll do, therefore, is I'll divide my talk. I've divided my talk into three sections or three parts. In the first part, I'm going to interrogate, I'm going to investigate what really I'm going to lay down what commercial surrogacy is. But particularly, I'm going to look at commercial surrogacy as a case study for the reach of capitalism into the realm of reproduction. How capitalism by changing, by considering even bodies as having exchange value or use value, become one of the major sources, become an instrument, a major instrument of exploitation of women by turning womb hiring, the practice of commercial surrogacy, that is womb hiring, into a profit-driven industry. In the second part of my talk, I'm going to again examine the many intersections of race, gender, and class, which are embedded in the discursive and material practices of commercial surrogacy. I'm going to especially look at the shady business of how third world women in India and Nepal and Thailand and Cambodia are often used as a sort of continue to be used as colonial conduits to deliver babies for parents from first world. And finally, in the last part, I'll examine the social, medical, and ethical issues of commercial surrogacy as they are represented in a new genre of fiction, which I call reprofiction. And the novels that I'm going to cite as examples of body politics and Google babies and post-colonial booms, these novels, I have called them narratives of the native. So this is sort of the blueprint of my talk for today on post-colonial, or rather on Google babies, post-colonial wombs, and body politics. At the center of it, once again, I'm going to look at how the body, or rather how babies are becoming refashioned by advanced technologies of artificial reproduction, and how fiction, or is there any kind of fiction which sort of brings these issues or the subject of commercial surrogacy as at the center of their narration, at the center of their narrative plots. So, does it sound good?
Yes, sir.
Right. So first, let me share my screen. There we go. Can you see my screen?
Yes, visible.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Great. Right. So this, friend, is the topic of my talk today: Google babies, post-colonial wombs, and body politics, narratives of, you see, in Indian English fiction. First, let me map the context as to, which would really answer why I've chosen this topic. One is, I'm going to give you in a couple of minutes a sort of a genealogy of what commercial surrogacy, of the entire material practice of commercial surrogacy, as well as its many politics of money, politics of identity, and politics of race. In 2010, good 12 years back, a documentary called Google Baby, what you see on the slide, a documentary on Google Baby was produced by an Israeli director, which you can easily access now on YouTube. It's been uploaded on YouTube, and this documentary follows, the business of a gay Israeli entrepreneur who's shown to provide a special kind of service to gay men or gay couples in Israel, gay couples in Israel, gay couples, same-sex couples, who wish to have a family. And so the documentary shows how this entrepreneur, this businessman, helps his customers purchase eggs and sperms online. Yeah, you heard me right. The documentary shows how this Israeli businessman helps his customers purchase eggs and sperm online, and then how surrogate mothers in India are contacted with the help of doctors and middlemen, touts and middlemen, and then their babies are conceived and delivered, often in clinics in Gujarat, Rajasthan, and Uttar Pradesh. So the video shows, when you watch it, you will see that you'll see the very, very rather strange and sometimes unsettling picture of Israeli men, viewing these gay couples, viewing the egg donor profiles. Pay attention to what I'm saying. The egg donor profiles of white US women, online, of course, and then going on to buy ova, which is then gestated in the wombs of Indian surrogates in these small towns, in these cities and small towns, who work as reproductive laborers. And before you can say, wow, the entire process, you see, the Google baby, what I call the Google baby, or the documentary also calls it the Google baby. The Google baby, a baby which is customized, a baby that is sought, a baby that is sort of customized by matching the profiles of from US women who are egg donors to the men themselves. And this Google baby is traded for money, of course, and foreign couples come to India to collect their customized product, the baby, I'm saying, as a customized product, and then return to Israel, while the documentary shows the surrogate woman, the Indian woman getting reunited with her husband and family, perhaps with a better bank account. I'm not saying a fat bank account, but a better bank account. Friends, transnational commercial surrogacy, what we call, now this is an example of border crossing, transnational border crossing of what? Border crossing of artificial reproductive technologies, border crossings of ova, embryo, and being gestated in India. So when you think of this entire process, this transnational commercial surrogacy, it is actually a business exchange in which a woman carries and gives birth to another person's or a couple's baby in exchange for money. And the process, as I said, has been facilitated by advancement in reproductive technologies. These are called ART, assisted reproductive technologies, or artificial reproductive technologies. Put simply, friends, commercial surrogacy is the hiring or renting of wombs for money. And such an exchange or trade has become a popular global phenomenon, a very lucrative and thriving global practice. In fact, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, but one that attracts, therefore, intense debate and heated controversy. I mean, commercial surrogacy, commercial surrogacy as a practice, it sort of divides opinion and polarizes positions among feminists, among women rights groups, and of course, gender experts. Some in debates and discussions, there are two extreme positions that are often taken with regard to the practice of commercial surrogacy. There are some who are staunch advocates who support the concept of commercial surrogacy. What it's also called International Commercial Gestational Surrogacy, or ICGS. And they support the practice on the ground including feminists, some feminists support the practice on the ground that it sort of restores women's right over their bodies and gives them the freedom to exercise their reproductive choices.
Sir,
On the other,
excuse-
yeah,
Sir, slides are not moving.
no, I'm still on the,
Okay, fine. Sorry.
I'm still on this slide, the context. Can you see that? The slide which is called the context.
The first one, na?
The context, a genealogy of commercial surrogacy.
No, sir, we're on the title slide. We've missed the Google baby slide, and we cannot see the context slide, the third one.
Yeah.
Now it's visible. Yeah.
Google baby is there.
Okay. Search and what you cannot find on Google, right? So, yeah. So there we are. So, I was talking about how there are extreme positions with regard to the very notion, to the idea and practice of international or transnational commercial surrogacy. There are feminists, there are people, including feminists, who support the practice on the grounds that it sort of enables women to, it gives women the power and the agency to decide whether they want babies or not, and in what manner, by what mode should the babies be delivered. So reproductive choices, it gives women the freedom to choose in what way and in what manner to reproduce babies. On the other hand, you have feminists on the other extreme, are feminists such as Gloria Steinem herself, the celebrated feminist writer and thinker and activist, who vigorously opposes the practice of commercial surrogacy, saying that, that commercial surrogacy is just another polite name. It's a sort of a polite name for the ruthless and unashamed exploitation of women's bodies. Because she says that it is women who are in dire poverty. Often, who are the surrogates? It is women often who are in poverty, who come from economically and socially disadvantaged sections of society, who are then forced to become these sort of commercialized vessels, renting out their wombs, and the fetuses that they carry during the gestation period, that is the 9 months, become the property of others, those who have money, or rather their prospective parents. And often these parents, as I said, are international parents. So in 2012, I'm continuing to give you an overview of the context in which we are talking about commercial surrogacy. In 2012, this feminist writer and named Judith Warner, she wrote a rather eyeball-grabbing article called "Outsourced Wombs" in the New York Times. And Warner raised ethical questions. She gave a critique of the whole business of commercial surrogacy, but this time she raises ethical questions in the article about the hiring of wombs. She raised questions about what she felt is the essentially exploitative nature of the practice, and then related it to the ways in which race and ethnicity are actually inscribed. Race, ethnicity, caste, and class are inscribed in the practice of commercial surrogacy. In fact, she called commercial surrogacy as a new form of neo-colonialism or a new form of neo-imperialism in the 21st century. Now, this becomes very interesting then. She also, by citing data from reliable sources, she highlighted the fact that how increasingly women and couples from the US, from the UK, from Australia, and Europe, that is all first world countries, that is the global north, they have been in the past so many years have been traveling to India in order to hire surrogate mothers to deliver for them their babies. Also, she draws our attention in this article to an unfair trade practice. she points out that that commercial surrogacy, the business transaction over Google babies that takes place online, is in fact an instance of an unfair trade practice, because she points out that there is a huge gap. There is actually a huge gap in the payment that is made to Indian surrogates when compared to their counterparts in America and Europe. Indian women, she says, and she backs her claim by giving us statistics and data. Indian women, she says, are paid a fraction, friends, of the going rate to that is paid to white women in order to gestate and deliver babies. So whereas a white woman would probably, a white surrogate in the United States would be paid something in the range of 10 lakhs or something, an Indian woman would merely get 3 lakhs. So in her article, she points out to the many, not only to the nefarious nature of this practice, the illegality of the practice, but she also seems to suggest that this entire transaction, or this trade between bodies, babies, and money, is another instance of neo-capitalism and neo-imperialism. It is the exploitation of women from first world countries by third world countries. And immediately the connection that comes to our mind is like multinational companies. Multinational companies, as has been, since the 1990s, when we have talked about globalization as a boom, we talk about multinational companies. And so multinationals outsourcing what of their production of commodities, which is outsourced to third world countries, to do what? To take advantage of cheap labor. To take primarily advantage of cheap labor is the same pattern is repeated when couples from the global north are traveling to global south in order to purchase the cheap source of reproductive labor. Notice, therefore, the connection that she's making between the operation of multinational companies and commercial surrogacy, or companies that actually practice commercial surrogacy. So Warner also, however, has, she kind of gives examples from fiction in the same article. She quotes, she mentions the dystopian fiction of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World and Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale. I'm sure many of us would have read the book as well as seen the series, during lockdown on Netflix. Now, in both narrations of both narratives of these two novels, Aldous Huxley's Brave New World and Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale, women are treated like sex slaves. They are brutally exploited by men in totalitarian regimes, and they are forced to serve their autocratic masters for both recreation as well as procreation. And the two novels, therefore, that are cited by Judith Warner are sort of fictional representations of what is happening in the real world. Fictional representations of what is happening in the real world, meaning that essentially they point out to the problematic aspects of commercial surrogacy because they showcase, because they highlight the plight of women. Women's lack of reproductive agency, women's lack of sexual autonomy, women's lack of freedom on what to do with their own bodies, and even the choices of whether they would like to be mothers or not. So what is really imagined in these tales by writers like Huxley and Atwood is, in fact, a lived reality for third world women. And outside of fiction, there is absolutely no doubt that it's not just in fiction that we get a sort of a over-the-top description of the exploitative aspects of commercial surrogacy. The practice of commercial surrogacy undoubtedly is the harsh reality for many women from third world countries. It was only in 2002 that you see Indian commercial in India, now in an Indian context, I'm quickly coming to India, that this commercial surrogacy as an industry was accepted. And by 2020, in fact, this industry has burgeoned. I mean, in terms of being, it is estimated to be something like $2.5 billion. So although international commercial surrogacy has been a relative, you could say, has been a relative newcomer in what we often call medical tourism. Medical tourism in India, what has been the major driver to push commercial surrogacy as one of the most profitable industries is, of course, the considerable advances made in artificial reproductive technologies, the ART. Please mute. Participants are requested to mute. So it is, you'll be surprised to know that it is estimated that a third of the babies born via commercial surrogacy in India are for international parents. And the demand over the years has kept on rising. Also, what made commercial surrogacy in the early 2010, the period between 2010 to 2020, nearly a decade, what made it a venture capital driven industry in India was precisely because it was largely unregulated. I mean, it did not. Commercial surrogacy, although was accepted as a legally productive profession or industry, yet it had not attracted the attention of the government. It had not come under the scanner. And so government rules and regulations, which would have given some kind of protection, legal protection, definitely, to women who were exploited, to the Indian surrogates who were exploited, these government rules and regulations for the better part of a decade from 2010 to 2020 were lax, and there was no alert agency to monitor this trade that went on crossing international borders, but dealing primarily with Indian wombs. So no wonder with the easy availability of Indian surrogates, with the low costs involved, because foreign would-be parents or wannabe parents would have to pay only 1/3 of the going rate, as I said, to an Indian surrogate rather than to a Western surrogate, and the lack of government regulation in India. All of these factors combine together to make transnational commercial surrogacy a roaring practice, where where Western commissioning parents more and more started looking to India, not just to India, but India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and even Southeast Asian countries like Thailand and Cambodia. So what really, therefore, is at the center? Why have I chosen, to bring commercial surrogacy as the subject of my talk today for you? Well, commercial surrogacy actually, look at the advertisements and look at the way in which big businesses and the companies that are involved in commercial surrogacy transactions advertise, calling it, welcome to India, fertility tourism. India is one of the main destinations. These are all, it's all there on social media as well as the internet. And then these companies also sort of lure prospective parents, that is white prospective parents in the US, UK, and Europe, of selecting India as a reproductive destination. Not just medical tourism, but as a reproductive destination. And it offers such companies offer many sops and bonuses for choosing them as brokers, as international brokers, to identify surrogate mothers in India. So what are we going to discuss about? Well, by now you would have gathered that transnational or international commercial surrogacy is by itself a very complex phenomena. In fact, it's a part of the entire process, entire phenomena that we call globalization, which means the movement of products, labor, capital, and now of wombs and babies across international borders. So it's a very complex phenomena, and because it's a complex phenomena, it's kind of fascinating to investigate the nature and practice of commercial surrogacy, because for us in the humanities, not just literature, but for us in the humanities, it poses some serious questions with which we can grapple. For example, who benefits? In commercial surrogacy, who benefits and who is exploited? Who has ownership of their own bodies and wombs? And how are poor women in Asian countries or South Asian countries, how are they turned into hiring wombs in order to deliver Google babies to white people? And how are the inequalities of race, gender, and class, how are they sort of reproduced and reinforced in the material practice as well as in the discourse on commercial surrogacy? So, the many of the issues related to this complex phenomena of commercial surrogacy is what I have put on the slide. And the issues that are at the focus of our discussion immediately, of course, connects it with feminism. The minute we are talking about babies, mothers, motherhood, and reproduction, this perhaps is this is a core issue of feminist debate and feminist dialogue. Sophie Lewis, I want to point out to you a seminal book, a recent book, in fact, a very recent book. This book came out in 2019. It is by a Marxist feminist critic named Sophie Lewis. The cover of the book is on the bottom of the slide. It's called Full Surrogacy. Full Surrogacy Now, Feminism Against Family. The title itself is very, very thought-provoking. Or rather, you could even say the title is very provocative, because the first point, the first argument, the first position that Sophie Lewis makes is that she calls the practice of commercial surrogacy as a capitalist industry, as another unabashed form of profit-making enterprise. And also, however, Lewis makes the equally rather controversial feminist argument for abolishing the family. Now, when she says abolish the family, she doesn't mean to get rid of the family as a social institution, the family as a community relationship. No. What she actually advocates, what she's actually arguing, is to change the notions of what we think can be a family or what is a family. Now, she argues the reason why she says that our idea of family needs to be re-examined and has to be reinvented her argument is based on the fact that, that as human beings, society perhaps gives an over-determining emphasis on biological relationships of kith and kin. She says that, husband, wife, father, daughter, this concept of family or filial relationship is rather overstated and overvalued because she says they uphold, because it serves the capitalist industry to uphold the myth of the family as the most natural cornerstone of society and culture. Filial relationships, the ties of family, according to Sophie Lewis, serves to strengthen not only patriarchy and masculinity, but also the drivers of capitalism. Because it is under capitalism that women's reproductive labor, their capacity to procreate, is propagated as something that is normal, something that is natural, something that is essential, only because it sort of inscribes it with femininity. That if that to be a woman, and of course only women can give birth to babies, but to be a woman essentially means that her destiny is to be a mother. And so this whole baby industry worth millions of dollars, according to Sophie Lewis, rides on this sustained consolidation of the myth of the mother. This entire ideology, the capitalist ideology, which drives the baby boom industry, is one that equates motherhood with femininity and femininity with patriarchy, or femininity with family. So what does Lewis then argue? What does she propose? If she finds everything, the capitalist society, which also she says is patriarchal, then what is her alternative model? Well, her alternative model, in fact, is a very, very startling one. She says, like a typical Marxist feminist critic, her alternative model of society is a society of what we call communitarian socialism, a sort of a feminist socialism where in a sense all women can be surrogates, not mothers, but they can be surrogates for each other. She goes on to argue in this book that feminists against capitalism must be feminists against the family, precisely because the norm of the nuclear family in society helps guarantee not only biological reproduction, but also divisions between paid and unpaid reproduction. And we know that the stark reality is that in any society, reproductive labor, unlike other kinds of commodity production labor, is unpaid. And when I say unpaid, meaning not just in terms of money, not in terms of its economics, but also in terms of social support, family support, or social support. So what she does in this book is to critique the powerful ideological role that the notion of family, the tradition of family plays in keeping woman under a man's thumb, while also extracting reproductive labor for free. So Lewis makes a very interesting, connection. Lewis makes a very interesting connection between commercial gestation. Just a minute. Yeah. There is a quote at the bottom of the slide. Can you see it? If sex work, she says, is the oldest profession, then gestation, that is surrogacy, is also the other oldest profession. If sex work, she says, prostitution, she says, is the oldest profession, then gestation or commercial surrogacy is the other oldest profession, because in both cases, it is the family or the idea of the family that determines and controls what is allowable and what is not allowable for a woman. So Lewis actually thinks of the family as both the cause as well as the outcome for perpetuating capitalist patriarchy. Because on the one hand, capitalism seems to celebrate motherhood, but on the other hand, it also commodifies motherhood, turning mothering into a paid labor. And this is how capitalism, Lewis argues, continues to safeguard its propensity to make profit out of women's bodies or out of women's reproductive labor. It aggressively advertises, it aggressively publicizes the images of women as procreator and nurturer of family in order to exploit her as unpaid labor. So for, Lewis, it's a book which makes for a very, very interesting read because of the plethora of ideas that she brings in. So whether you agree or disagree, the ideas that she puts forth in this book, arguing against the practice of commercial surrogacy, makes for a very interesting reading. So Lewis wants to argue that the problem of commercial surrogacy, or the problem of this with the surrogacy industry, is not surrogacy. It is not surrogacy per se, but rather the industry aspect of it. She argues that surrogacy is work. She calls it womb work. Surrogacy is work. It is womb work, she says, in which surrogates become workers, babies become products, and abortion becomes a form of wildcat strike. And so she shows how the business of renting wombs as practiced is primarily driven by profit. All right. Are you with me? So far, so
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Always with you, sir.
Yes.
thank you. So Lewis, friends, Lewis is by no means the first writer. Of course, I told you that the book is very, very provocative. It's very fascinating to read. But she was not really the first writer to apply a Marxist feminist model to reproduction and motherhood. In fact, you will all remember, those of you, you had a session on feminism, isn't it? And I'm not sure, but did the name of Shulamit Firestone come up? The American feminist writer and activist, Shulamit Firestone. Anyway, Shulamit Firestone, this is a work that, the dialectics of sex. This is a work that that came out in 1970. And is another very famous example where, you know, against patriarchy, against exposing the many ways in which patriarchy, feudalism, and capitalism all combined together keep the woman in a subordinated position. And Firestone, again, very radically in this book, argues against the romantic view of childbearing. Those who, you know, sort of glorify motherhood as the apogee, the final and the ultimate destiny of a woman. Because she insists that far from it being, you know, childbearing being romantic, she says that it is actually, it's a grueling, burdensome form of labor performed obviously by women as workers, who are then legally subordinated to husbands, because husbands are really the owners of the means of production. Notice again the Marxist frame that she uses when she talks about reproduction as a form of labor. So Firestone, in this path-breaking feminist text called The Dialectic of Sex, argues that that women can hope to be free from this biological oppression only if they develop, only through the not they, but only when technology develops artificial wombs. At the bottom of the page, there is another feminist theorist. Ruth Hubbard. Ruth Hubbard. Again, this book, friends, The Politics of Women's Biology. Those of you who are into feminism, teach feminism, or who research in feminism, could look into this book. It's called The Politics of Women's Biology. Again, a very interesting take. This time, Ruth Hubbard is a biochemist. She's a biochemist, and she examines the role of science, particularly medical sciences or medical technologies, in the exploitation of women. And her argument is that advancement in genetic and reproductive technologies, far from being a value-free way of empowering women, do just the opposite. She argues that advanced reproductive technologies once again celebrates the myth of motherhood, and in turn, or rather by turn, therefore, becomes the chief source of women's oppression. So the notion that all women desire to be a mother, she claims, she wants to dismantle or deconstruct by saying that the notion that all women desire to be mothers is a myth, but a myth that is perpetually presented as natural, essential, and real, because it becomes a disguised form of keeping women in a subordinated position. So the myth of motherhood, friends, according to Ruth Hubbard, the myth of motherhood makes fatherhood rule and be real. You know, look at the fascinating positions and arguments. Yes, debatable. Yes, disputable. Yes, you can disagree with them, but they draw you in to the conversation that you and I are having. So now comes the last part of my talk. That when you look at these advanced technologies that capitalism, in a sense, has bred, that the phenomenon of globalization has accelerated, using commercial surrogacy once again as a turning commercial surrogacy into a big business, into a roaring industrial practice. It's interesting when, if we think for a minute that if it's become such a big social issue, debatable issue, controversial issue, and there is so much of discourse, so many people, so many experts, medical doctors, feminists, human rights activists, all of them, you know, coming to bringing their own positions to it, then what about literature? Does the subject of commercial surrogacy, has it attracted the attention of writers? In fact, yes. And that is what I wanted to introduce to you. Yes, much like medical memoirs or illness narratives, and the South Asian, or rather the Asian American illness narrative that I spoke about in the earlier talk, I wish to draw your attention to the fact that writers, fiction writers, in recent years, in fact, have engaged. They have grappled with the most intricate issues of commercial surrogacy, and they have created a distinctive body of work that I choose to call narratives of natal. Because I call them narratives of natal because commercial surrogacy treats women, or rather, commercial surrogacy treats wombs as sort of assembly lines for manufacturing Google babies. And these narratives also depict the violence that is done to women, the violence that is, that is done to women, both in partum and postpartum condition, the pre-delivery and the post-delivery condition of surrogates. And women, which women? Surrogates. I'm talking of surrogates. So such narratives, friends, are of course not surprising. It doesn't surprise. It shouldn't surprise us that these novels in recent years have all been written by women writers. So on your slide, what you see is just a selection of recent fiction on what I call narratives of natal. Meera Syal's The House of Hidden Mothers, Kishwar Desai's Origins of Love, Catherine Mackill's The Surrogate, and so on and so forth. I mean, recently, I don't know whether you've seen this film, Mimi.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, we have seen it.
Oh, good. Right. So Mimi is a cinematic representation of the many issues of issues of commercial surrogacy. And I felt it treated the theme of commercial surrogacy in a very, very sensitive way. So those of you who are, who want to take this further can even watch the film Mimi. So Meera Syal, I'm going to take two examples, both written by Indian diasporic writers, and one is Meera Syal, The House of Hidden Mothers. Meera Syal, of course, many of us would know her for being a woman, a multifaceted woman. I mean, she's a singer, she's an actress, and who has acted in some very famous television serials and also films like The Kumars, The House of Kumars, if you've seen that television series, and many diasporic films of Meera Nair as well. Anyway, since we are more, I'm more focused on a fiction, and she's not a prolific writer, but this particular book, while I was, I have been researching on transnational commercial surrogacy for quite a few years now. So I came upon this book by Meera Syal, and once again, this is a book I choose to highlight because it throws light on some of the problematic aspects that we have discussed about commercial surrogacy already. Now, the book came out in 2016, and interestingly, I mean, it was around this time that the government of India was thinking of coming up with a draft commercial surrogacy bill that would sort of legislate the practice of commercial surrogacy in India. And the draft surrogacy bill included several measures protecting Indian women from being exploited by this monopolistic and profit-making industry. In an interview, Syal says that when she was asked why she chose to write on commercial surrogacy, she says, I decided to write on surrogacy. Just give me a minute. I seem to have lost that note where that line is. Incidentally, while I'm looking for that lost note, what you see on the slide is the epigraph to her novel. Meera Syal has used the lines from The Handmaid's Tale as the epigraph to the novel. I seem to have lost whatever I was trying to find out. But, in that interview with Syal, she discloses that the reason why she chose to write a novel on commercial surrogacy is because he says the very subject of surrogacy intrigued her first as a woman, second as a feminist, and third as a mother. And so she said that she wanted to expose, at least through her fiction, she wanted to expose the goings-on, the nefarious goings-on. So in the novel, it's all about commercial surrogacy. So in the novel, there is a character named Shama. I mean, she is the daughter. She's the daughter of immigrant parents. She is a 48 or 40-something-year-old successful London beauty owner, and she's a divorcee. She's a divorcee. Shama is shown to she's a divorcee, but she is in a relationship with a British national named Toby, and she wants to start a family with Toby, but she is medically certified as infertile, that she's not fertile, right? And so she cannot conceive. And Toby wants to be a father. Toby wants to start, her British boyfriend wants to be a father. He wants to start a family. And so he convinces her to agree to the idea of commercial surrogacy by finding a womb in India. And so the story shows how this surrogate, how they look for a surrogate in India. So the entire, the whole journey is made trying to find touts and middlemen who would make the process smooth. And they come upon this woman named Mala, who is identified as the surrogate woman. And Mala, not surprisingly, is a woman who comes from a small town. In fact, she's not from a town. She's from a village in the hinterland of northern India. She's living in poverty. She is in dire straits. And these touts, who go around villages and towns, particularly in the country, in the rural side, looking for prospective baby bearers. And so Mala is selected. In the novel, it is by this process, of hunting, of where these middlemen and touts hunt for a baby bearer. And all of this, of course, shows in the novel, the purpose of the novel is to starkly show how a deal is fixed. The deal is fixed between the many stakeholders. There are, in the bargain, there are doctors, there are cuts, there are cuts and commissions which are earned first by the doctors, then the touts, then the nursing staff, then the healthcare workers, and these are also the stakeholders who are involved in it. And the doctors themselves at the surrogacy clinic know that this is pure business, and of course the surrogate mothers also. But the big question remains whether somebody like Mala in the novel chooses to be a surrogate mother of her own will and accord, or is it something that she is forced into by first a husband, by a family, by the pressures of poverty. I mean, that is the issue here. So anyway, the story moves forward to show that how they sign a contract, or rather the husband signs the contract with this NRI family, and in the contract, Mala and her husband are made to that they give up all claims to the delivered, that is the child delivered in exchange for money. Also, I mean, I'm going to show you a quote. Please mute. I'm going to show a quotation from this novel on the slide. This is a doctor in the novel thinking aloud. And the doctor's words, in fact, captures the very profit-making motive, which is at the center of commercial surrogacy or Google baby production. He says this was a business transaction. It's a rather long quote, but it'll give you an idea of what the novel is all about. Fundamentally, it says money made it possible. Money was the incentive, supply and demand, the basis for all successful trading. And India had fertile, poor women. Notice the language. India had fertile, poor women, and Britain and America and most places west of Poland had wealthy, infertile women. And so it had begun with companies moving their call centers towards the rising sun. So what was wrong with outsourcing babies there too? And when at the end of the process, there was a new human being and a woman with financial independence, it was a win-win situation, wasn't it? So in a sense, this passage from the novel pulls together all the major issues which can invite comments from you, either of agreement or of disagreement. The other book is this book, Origins of Love by Kishwar Desai. She's also a diasporic Indian woman writer. She settled in the UK, and she came up with this book called Origins of Love. But what I would like to do is to introduce a new term for you, by which you can, a theoretical concept by which we can hook the analysis of so-called narratives of the natal. Now, friends, much as the previous books that I've cited by written by Marxist feminist writers like Lewis and Firestone and Richard Hubbard, but also this is a book, not a book, but a theoretical concept which I wanted to introduce to you. It's called retroscape or retroflow. This is Marcia Inhorn. Now, Marcia Inhorn is again she's a medical practitioner. You could call her a medical, it's a curious term. In fact, she's called a medical anthropologist. But she has researched extensively on the impact of artificial reproductive technologies on women in the Arab world. women in the Arab world, but I won't go into the details, there's not time enough. But what I found in reading her work, in reading her writing, is this word reproscape, is this concept called reproscape, because reproscape or reproflow immediately reminds us of this very famous postmodern global theorist named Arjun Appadurai. Now, Arjun Appadurai, if many of you would know, describes the whole phenomena of globalization as a sort of a flow. He talks about the 5 scapes, how globalization works its procedures and practices through the movement of 5 things, and he calls them scapes. And what are they? Well, the movement of ideas he calls ideoscapes, or the movement of ideologies is what he calls ideoscapes. The movement of people from different countries and different ethnicities he calls ethnoscapes. Then the movement of finance as finance and capital, money and finance and capital, he calls financescapes, then mediascapes, and so on, and technoscapes, the movement of technology. Now, what Marcia Inhorn does is that because she focuses on artificial reproductive technologies and how they sort of, they are very much an integral part of the movements and flows of globalization, she coins a new concept or a new word called reproscape. So this is the 6th term that she adds to Arjun Appadurai's 5 scapes. And what do we mean, or what does she mean by reproscape? Now, reproscape for her is, I'm going to read out to you. She says, it refers to a distinct geography traversed by global flows of reproductive actors, technologies, and body parts. Pay attention to what she says. It's the global flow, not of capital, not of labor, not of wages, but it's not even of markets, but it is the global flow of body parts and technologies. And by body parts, what does she mean? Well, it is, for example, the global flow of, embryos that are frozen embryos, the movement of frozen embryos as they are carried by, or as they are transported, as they are shipped or airlifted or transported from these UK and US and other, from the global north, and carried to the Indian subcontinent to be gestated in the wombs of surrogate mothers. So there is a flow of embryos. There is a flow also of how egg donors and surrogates are flown across or born across borders. And so reproscape, therefore, it stands for the movement of reproductive technologies and body parts, including embryos and fetuses across national borders. And that I find is, is a very relevant concept, which provides a theoretical tool to analyze the representation of commercial surrogacy in fiction. All right. Once again, Kishwar Desai's Origins of Love, the second novel that I'm talking about, it also focuses on the nexus of commercial surrogacy, crime and corruption, and how it attracts doctors, touts, helpless surrogates, and sort of dollar flaunting Western child seekers. So this is again in this story, however, something there is an interesting twist to it, because the central character is a woman, is a feisty social worker named Simran Singh, and it's a sort of you could read the book as a sort of a medical thriller, because Simran Singh, the character, is shown to be a social worker in Delhi, and it is she who discovers that a child who is born through IVI, that is through artificial insemination and surrogacy, is sort of abandoned by the rich adoptive foreign parents, because he's born with a disability. Doesn't have a limb. He's born without a limb. And so the story in Kishwar Desai's Origins of Love is a story about how Simran tries to search to find the sperm donor who fathered the child, as well as the woman who became the surrogate. And how, in the course of her search, she stumbles upon an international web of corruption, deceit, and violence within surrogacy, commercial surrogacy. Commercial surrogacy, as I have said before, has been a hot topic of debate and discussion. And in fact, it was brought to the limelight by Barkha Dutt in anchoring this program called We the People. It still comes on a Sunday, but this is some years back. And it's interesting when you find it on YouTube and you look at how Barkha Dutt invited surrogate mothers in India, also rich, affluent foreign couples who have benefited or who have taken advantage of surrogate mothers in India. And so when they were asked, when Barkha Dutt directly, asked these surrogate mothers why they chose to do it, most of them said, something like, dialogues or lines to the effect like, हम अपनी कोख से दूसरी औरतों का जीवन सुधार रहे हैं, या हम समाज सेवा के काम कर रहे हैं, that kind of a thing. So what came out of this debate in We the People was a kind of the way in which it is often couched, these words that were being mouthed by the Indian surrogates, and mostly they were poor people from small towns and rural India. And the way they were sort of mouthing these lines seemed to be from a rehearsed script. So the language itself that they were using was couched in perhaps, was parroted by them. These lines were parroted by them because they were sort of trained by their husbands, maybe by the doctors whom they consider to be their gods, because they provide, remember, commercial surrogacy or bearing the child of another, for them is a matter of livelihood. Because for surrogate mothers in India, poor surrogate mothers in India, they are supplement income earners. So every time they bear a child for a foreign couple, they get money to perhaps buy a house or to pay for a child's education, etc., etc. So while it might be easy for us to actually talk about through the lens of feminism and say that, what about the rhetoric of choice? Remember, rhetoric of choice was a slogan. It was the rallying cry of second wave feminism. It was an essential part of the feminist movement in the 1960s and the 1970s, where feminists came onto the streets in order to demand for women's rights and reproductive choices. And they also lobbied for the right of abortion. So, this rhetoric of choice, or women's right to choose, in fact, has continued to be one of the defining features, not just of second wave feminism, but also third wave feminism. And this rhetoric of choice is also firmly inscribed in the discourse on in the discourse of what we call reproductive liberalism. But ironically, let's not forget that the very same, market forces and scientific advancement that sort of champion artificial reproductive technology, what is the standard front posed by market forces and scientific knowledge? They say that, well, advanced, both under capitalism as well as with the help of advanced technologies, reproductive technologies, they sort of claim to empower women in practicing the rhetoric of choice. That women, because technology enables women to choose to exercise greater freedom over their bodies, not to become mothers at all, by by hiring other women's wombs. So that is what is enabled by technology. But it's not easy, isn't it? Is it? I mean, there are, as we have seen, as we have been discussing, there's far more complexity to it than what it appears on first sight. Because, um, you know, at the center of it, one should not forget that the burden of motherhood, which is the ideology of patriarchy and capitalism, it also shows that technologies themselves become, artificial reproductive technology themselves become the latest tool to subject women to tighter control and more ruthless exploitation. As is the case, like it is, artificial reproductive technology that enables poor women from Asia and South Asia to do reproductive labor. So it has two sides of the same coin, or one would say that there are multiple aspects to this rather complex phenomena of commercial surrogacy, which is facilitated by the drivers of technology, what I've already cited in my talk. What about clinics? Just a couple of more observations and I'll wrap up my talk. On the one hand, we've looked at several aspects of commercial surrogacy. So there are the parents, the foreign parents with plenty of dollars, carrying dollars. Then there are the surrogate mothers, mostly from rural India, poverty-stricken families. Then we are talking about medical Now we talk about medical doctors and clinics where commercial surrogacy is practiced, sometimes, many times legally, but also illegally by quacks. There's this very famous doctor in Anand. There is she runs an infertility clinic. And can't remember her name, Naina something. She too was invited incidentally by Barkhadat on the same show. And she very, very strongly defended the practice and the legalization of commercial surrogacy in India, saying that it sort of delivered women out of the burden of poverty, claiming that it helped to free women from the burden of poverty, and it also enabled women to exercise choice over what to do with their bodies. Anyway, but in the novels such as Origins of Love and The House of Hidden Mothers, incidentally, the title itself should show that sometimes all is not well with how it is practiced, how commercial surrogacy is practiced in these clinics, because they become the House of Hidden Mothers, a clinic, not really a clinic, but more like a prison house. Because these clinics are often well guarded. They are like prison-like buildings where visitors are not allowed without permission. And so surrogacy clearly becomes coercive when women are not given, when women are not explained by doctors and nurses and caregivers about the risks involved in carrying wombs, or rather in the risk carrying, of giving birth. But when they're risk meaning, well, both a labor is a labor, and deliveries can go wrong, and the after effects of not one, but sometimes multiple surrogacy reproduction can have a very damaging impact on a woman's body. Not just on her body, but it also entails an immense psychological strain on women, because after all, these women, surrogate women, carry what I've been calling Google babies in their wombs, and there is a maternal instinct not to part when finally the baby is delivered. So both the biological impact as well as the psychological impact of commercial surrogacy on women's health can be ruinous. And so when problems arise, as is shown in these novels, as well as in real practice, in the course of pregnancy or in the course of the delivery procedure, these Indian or surrogate women are often abandoned. And children who are born with any defect, as in the origins of Kishwar Desai's novel, Origins of Love, are simply abandoned. So surrogacy therefore degrades, as is shown by these two novels, surrogacy degrades a pregnancy to a service and a baby to a product. And just as a baby is rejected, and just as a product that carries a defect is rejected by the customer, similarly, the baby who is born with a disability or a deformed limb is rejected and abandoned. And then there is the larger question, as it happened in a few cases, both in India as well as abroad, about what is the status of an abandoned baby? Whose baby is it anyway? Does the baby become, is the baby an Indian or a foreigner? And the whole question of citizenship comes into play. All right. Well, look at the state of the clinic. This is a picture of a clinic in Gujarat. And the women that you see on the charpais are the surrogate. This book, Wombs in Labor by Amrita Pandey, is a very interesting social book, a book of social studies by Amrita Pandey, and she is from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Bombay. And she has produced a book out of her research on the fate of Indian surrogates in this baby booming enterprise. So friends, is surrogacy women's empowerment, and or to the larger question that when commercial surrogacy is represented in fiction, then does it really make a world of difference or a jot of difference to many of the central issues of surrogacy? Well, I would say definitely yes. To the question, do narratives of natal speak for disempowered women? Yes, it does. Because fiction writers, as it is, you see, surrogacy itself is a marginalized theme. And so when fiction writers, best-selling fiction writers like Sayal or Desai and many others make visible a subject which is not so visible, well, they bring it into the public forum. And so narratives of the natal, I would argue, play an important part in inviting and circulating debate and deliberations about the contentious issues of commercial surrogacy. It actually, it at least enables doctors, governments, NGOs, Women's Rights Commission, and the law, all of them to come together in order to find a way out of the evil practices or the illegal practices that come with commercial surrogacy. So I feel that the representation of commercial surrogacy in these in fiction is clearly, empowering. It clearly is a positive and affirming action, because these narratives of the natal, such as the writings of Desai and Sayal, they give us the other story. They give us a sort of a counter narrative to the way in which Western media and Western narratives talk about commercial surrogacy. Much like colonial narratives, which seem to celebrate the role, which glorified the role of the colonizer, that the colonizer came to India, well, to bring about not only to bring a civilizing mission with him. So the glorification of what was called the white man's burden is seen in a new form, at least in the Western narratives and Western media, about how, these rich American couple are lifting poor Indian women out of poverty by giving them dollars, by giving them rupees, or rather giving them dollars converted into rupees. So for me, the narratives of the natal friends does give a counter narrative, a narrative which brings out the lived experiences of third world surrogates. And in the process, these writers have given birth to a new kind of writing, which I have called retrofiction, and their stories I have called narratives of the natal. To the most important slide that you were looking forward to. Thank you.
Perhaps we were afraid when that slide will come, the last one. We didn't get to come.
Dr. Kapil is very, very polite and very, very gentlemanly.
So as the typical style of Professor Prantik sir, and he again started with questions about some renowned film personalities that included Shah Rukh Khan and Karan Johar. Well, there were few others as well. And what is common among them? Came to the world of commercials, there's commercial surrogacy, about the Google babies, post-colonial wombs, and body politics, which was the title of his presentation. Then we have he came to the narratives of he talked about the documentary by an Israeli director regarding on the subject, and the border crossing of embryo and as how it has transformed into a business. Then from the feminist point of view, it is supported. But on the other side, we also find that the poor women are exploited in this business, in this practice, which has taken a form of commercial business. And government regulations, there are not enough regulations from the side of government to look into the interest of these poor women. Then sir has also given a list of a few novels, a few fictions on the subject, and during the end of his presentation, he expressed concern for the women, or even for a women who are left alone after the practice is over, and even for a baby who are born with disabilities and are left abandoned. Then it is a question of the citizenship as well. That is what the point he addressed. And sir's view is that it can be a part of women empowerment, and government must take enough steps to remove evil practices which are there as a part of which are there in this practice. So I once again thanks sir for being here, and we will be meeting sir again for his fourth session on 16th of September. And thank you, sir. Thanks a lot.
Kapil sir, if the participants would like to ask me something or interact
questions, okay. Yeah, I missed out that.
Sir, may I go ahead with the question?
Yeah. Please.
Yeah. So thank you, sir, for that extremely unique and very interesting insight into the concept of commercial surrogacy. So what I understand is there is an integral contradiction in this idea that on one hand it allows first world women or even women working in India to choose whether or not to become a mother, and on the other hand it is exploiting the third world women, the poor people. So finally, like, where do we stand? Does it carry on with the cause of, does it forward the cause of feminism, as critical movements? Does it champion the cause of feminism more, or it becomes somewhere, it becomes like feminism versus that post-colonial orientalism kind of an area? So can you just compare the two, and just wanted to understand the degree to which?
Thanks for that question. Thanks for that response. A quick answer to that would be that, like any prickly issue, like any debate or any subject which can be engaged with from multiple and not necessarily consensual positions. The minute we say commercial surrogacy is whether it is a question of women's empowerment or whether it is a question of women's exploitation. It's almost similar to the debate about gay and queer marriages in India, and my take on that would be that technology itself is like a double-edged sword. You know, all through your refresher course, we have been talking about culture, society, literature, and technology. And technology works, technology is like a double-edged sword. On the one hand, yes, artificial reproductive, I look at what IVF has done to enable many, many infertile couples, to make it possible for them to enjoy the happiness and satisfaction of becoming parents. So on the one hand, you can say that such technologies do empower, do bring happiness to people's homes, helping them. As I've given you instances both from the novel and to the theories, technology also works to the disadvantage because at the center of this artificial reproductive technology is a woman's body, and so much of the trafficking that is done on about Google babies is about the body of not just any woman, but the body of a woman who comes from a thrice disempowered position. First, she's a woman. Second, she is a woman born into poverty. And third, she is a woman born in a patriarchal family or a patriarchal society. So she's thrice disempowered. And add to that, when truly, add to that the question that is she really free to choose whether or not to become a surrogate? Sometimes the pressure comes from her own family, including a mother-in-law maybe, who wants that extra supplement, as I said, to build a home, to finance a child's education, or sometimes even it might be, in extreme cases, it might be that the husband is not working at all. So these are very complicated issues, and there are no, there can't be one solution or one position to it. Yes, but what it does is, and what I said in my conclusion is that such narratives do bring into visibility, they bring into focus the woman at the center, and how technologies can woman once again monitoring and surveilling her body, but at the same time, the same technology, if it is properly regulated and monitored by government agencies, by feminist activists, as well as Women's Minority Rights Commission, if all these agencies and bodies come together, certainly then it becomes a win-win situation for women. I hope I've been able to answer you properly.
Thank you, sir. So just one observation I would like to make. When we studied or when we teach Marxist feminism, we only get the negative point of view that women is doubly exploited, both with domestic labor as well as, she's unpaid both with money as well as her domestic labor is unpaid. But in this case, it is indeed a win-win situation if things are, regulated well. So the commercial surrogacy, it actually, there is a possibility that this capitalism which is controlling it can actually be channelized towards the benefit of women as well, both the first world women as well as the third world women. So that's a very positive thing that comes out of commercial surrogacy, is what I understood.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely correct.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for this very interesting topic.
Sir, I would like to ask you which was the other book you mentioned along with the Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale? Which was the other book you mentioned?
That's a classic. Aldous Huxley's Brave New World.
Brave New World. Okay, right.
Yeah.
And sir, I would like to thank you on behalf of all the participants again for this path-breaking topic. It was really enjoyable, and the grave exploitation going on in the name of commercial surrogacy, we got to know. And something is so alarming that women are really forced into surrogacy sometimes by their families and all. It was really an enlightening lecture. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Hello, sir. Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, I have a question. Sir, if surrogate motherhood is to some extent sanctified or promoted, either as a livelihood or a service to the infertile mothers, then lesbian or gay couples who are not capable of bearing biological sons or babies, so can they access the opportunity of parenthood or becomes a father or mother of a baby?
Yeah,
Is
of
it
course.
permissible?
In,
Is it can be? Is it promoted in our society or in Indian context?
in a way,
Sir,
you've
please
answered.
explain.
In a way, you have answered the question. The question is whether it is legalized, whether commercial surrogacy as a
Yes, sir.
practice is legalized. The minute we say it is legalized, then it is protected by government, by the government. It is protected by government laws. And so there is a question, there can be a question, or rather it opens the window, it opens a window for surrogate mothers to knock on the doors, to take legal course, to knock on the doors of courts if they're exploited, either by the parents, the commissioning parents, or even by their own family. So the thing is that legal protection is very important. If surrogacy is legalized, like the age-old debate whether prostitution should be legalized or not. So if the question is that if prostitution can be legalized, well, something like commercial surrogacy also ought to be legalized.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for your elaborate answer. Okay.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, Sunita, right?
Yes, sir. Sir, are there some Indian writers who have written on this commercial surrogacy?
Well, I
Apart
just
from that, Amrita Pandey.
No, Amrita Pandey is, her work is not fiction. Her work is, yeah, it's a research report. It's a research report.
Then could you mention some? Could you mention some writers who have written on that commercial surrogacy, sir?
I just mentioned two, no? Maybe you didn't.
Kishwar. Acha, Kishwar Desai. And apart from her?
Kishwar Desai, Meera Syal, and not just Indian writers. In fact, if you Google, you will find that there are also writers from other countries who have written about commercial surrogacy. In fact, if this is again a very, I thought I would introduce this also because it perhaps might interest a researcher to take this up as a topic. So you Google and you'll find plenty of material on the net on writers. Why writers? Why writers alone? Even filmmakers and documentary. I mentioned Mimi, a recent film which.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, that film, huh? Okay, sir.
Examples.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. All right. I think enough, and I should say goodbye to you all.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Thank you once again. Thank you, Prantik.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
आप जना कॉल केला